of Education and Social Sciences at Robert Morris University, I would like to welcome you tonight to a debate in the Pennsylvania State Senate District 37 for the special election that will take place November 3rd. Robert Morris University is a student-centered institution that transforms lives by building knowledge, skills, and citizenship. The students have worked hard putting together this important event. We are pleased to welcome the two candidates for this important election to our campus tonight. It's now my pleasure to introduce our host, Assistant Professor of Political Science and Faculty Advisor to the RMU Political Science Club, Dr. Justin DePlato. Justin.
Thank you, Dean Rayford. We are honored to be hosting our two candidates for this debate. Guy Reschenthaler is the Republican candidate for State Senate for Jefferson Hills. He's a graduate of Thomas Jefferson High School, Penn State DeBarron College, and Duquesne Law School. Guy is a former Navy JAG officer who prosecuted terrorists in Iraq and is a former district judge. Heather Arnay is the Democratic candidate, and for the last 12 years she has been the CEO of the Women and Girls Foundation. Heather earned her BA from Carnegie Mellon University, has previously served as member of the Pittsburgh Public Schools Board of Education, and currently serves as board chair of the Johnston Institute for Responsible Leadership and chair of the MS Foundation Board. The questions tonight have been selected by students in the Political Science Club here at Robert Morris University. In this first round, there will be 10 questions, and each candidate will have 1 minute and 30 seconds to respond. There will be no rebuttals. The order of answering each question has been determined with a coin toss. The audience has been asked to remain silent throughout. Mr. Reschenthaler, you won the coin toss, so you have the first question. Pennsylvania is currently facing a budget crisis since the legislature and the governor have been unable to pass a budget for the last 120 days. Who, in your view, is responsible for this late budget, and what are your top priorities when it comes to balancing Pennsylvania's budget?
Yes. Well, first off, thanks for having us here tonight. Great forum to come and talk about the issues in the 37th. Now, as for the budget, we don't have a budget passed since November, or quickly approaching November. What we need to do is we need to have common sense. We need to work together. So as a district judge, I couldn't not do my job. I had to listen to both sides in the courtroom. I had to weigh their arguments, and I had to come to a decision quickly. We need Harrisburg to work like that, and I want to bring that kind of judicial style philosophy to the state capitol. Now, when looking at the budget, what we need to do is twofold. We need to make sure that we have funding for our public schools, number one. And we also need to make sure that we don't have increases in taxes. I want to fight for the taxpayer. I want to make sure that we don't expand the tax base with a sales tax. I want to make sure that we don't increase the sales tax or the or the personal income tax. So those would be my two goals.
Thank you. Ms. Arnay?
So
same question, yes.
So first, I too want to thank everyone here at Robert Morris University, the dean and yourself and the Political Science Club. It's been just a pleasure to get to spend some time with the students this evening. So thank you for hosting this tonight. So as far as the budget impasse, I mean, it is pretty incredible, isn't it, that whoever wins this election next week will most probably vote on the state budget. So I work in the nonprofit sector. I've been the CEO of the Women and Girls Foundation, as you said, for 12 years. And I know that one of the worst things is that this budget is hitting our most vulnerable the hardest. So certainly I too believe in bipartisanship. I think it's been unfortunate that part of why this impasse has occurred is because a lot of the question has been about one side wanting to balance the budget on the backs of our children and seniors. I think we've been given a choice that is whether we want to fund public education or ensure that seniors have quality pensions. And I think that's a Sophie's choice. I don't think it's a fair choice, and I don't think it's a choice we should make. I was glad to hear today the Senate Democratic leadership announce that they had been in continued conversations and that the issue of sales and earned income tax is no longer on the table. GOP and the governor had both had presentations around that. That's no longer an issue, and I know that's something that I and many taxpayers are glad to hear.
Ms. Arnay, the next question to you. Let's talk now about a current issue, liquor privatization. Governor Wolf vetoed legislation this summer to privatize wine and liquor sales in Pennsylvania. Was he right to do this? And what is your stance on liquor privatization? And with a big budget standoff, is this something that should be priority now?
So if I had been in the state legislature in 1933, I probably wouldn't have voted to put the government in the liquor business. But unfortunately, I wasn't there. And so now we have this system that is our system, and we have to figure out what we can do about it. Now, one of the things that's so important, and I think why Governor Corbett went to office saying he was going to achieve liquor privatization, had a full Republican legislature, and he couldn't do it. And that's because right now the liquor system provides $550 million of renewable income every year to our state. And so for me, it's about, one, if we're going to do something, how do we ensure that we have sustainable revenue, not just a one-time fix for our state economy? And then also, how do we ensure that the 5,000 families that are currently employed by that system would be guaranteed to have sustainable, livable wages and jobs with benefits? So first, we need reliable income, steady, not just a one-time fix, and we need to make sure that those 5,000 families and more have access to great jobs. For me, that's what it comes down to.
Mr. Reschenthaler?
Yes. For me, this issue is very straightforward. I don't believe that the state should be involved in selling liquor. For me, it's just not a core function of government and something that we should not be involved in. Now, what we need to do is we need to make sure that we also take the liquor stores, and we have to look at what's going on now. We have the LCB controlling the sale of liquor. That's a problem because there's a conflict of interest there. So if we privatize the liquor stores, not only will we have an increase of revenue because we'll sell the liquor stores, but we'll also break this conflict of interest where we have the LCB legislating and regulating the liquor stores, which is inherently a conflict of interest because they're selling the liquor. As for the revenue, we can still get revenue from liquor. It's the tax that brings in the revenue. We'll still have the tax on our liquor. It'll just be the private sector that's selling the liquor, not the government.
Great, thank you. Next question goes to you, Mr. Reschenthaler. In wake of the school shootings, such as the recent tragedy in Oregon earlier this month, the students are wondering about your stance on gun control. Should Pennsylvania's gun laws be made tougher, more relaxed, or are they fine the way they are? Is advocating for gun control the right response to these tragedies, particularly if there's been a significant drop in firearms deaths in schools over the last 20 years, according to the Crime Prevention Research Center? Further, they want to get a sense of where you draw the line with the constitutional protections regarding the right to bear arms, and in particular, should laws about gun shows in Pennsylvania be changed, since it is currently legal for unlicensed dealers at a gun show to sell rifles and shotguns without conducting a background check?
So those are a lot of questions to answer in a minute and a half, but I'll try my best. I think as a general rule, we have to look at legislation when it comes to gun control. We've got three pockets and three segments of society that really come into play here. We have law-abiding citizens, one. We have those who have severe mental illness, two. And then we have criminals. No matter what legislation we have and what laws we put forward, the law-abiding segment is going to follow those laws. So we have to concentrate on the other two. I think that what we need is serious mental health reform in this country, and in this state in particular. As a district judge, I worked really hard to make sure that defendants were getting screened for mental health issues and getting the treatment that they needed if they did. Now, what we need to do is we need to make sure that those who are a danger to themselves or others don't have guns. That's just common sense. So we do need to do something about it. Now, on the other segment, we have those who are criminals. We have to make sure that we fight to reduce the recidivism rate of violent crime and make sure that those commit violent crimes don't have access to guns. A lot of that is done by shoring up the black market, which is where most of these criminals get the guns, the black market. Thank you.
Ms. Arnay?
Well, as a mother of a son who goes to public school every day and the wife of a husband who goes to a college campus to teach, he's a college professor, you can imagine that, like other parents, these school shootings have been devastating to see. And I think that all parents, and certainly the majority of Americans, have said that we need some form of common sense gun regulation. Now, I am not interested in taking anyone's constitutional rights away. In fact, as a lawmaker, my job will be to protect our constitutional rights, and certainly I honor our Second Amendment right to bear arms. But most gun owners, too, will agree that we can do that and also ensure that our children are safe in schools. My opponent has said on his own radio show that he thinks the solution to school shootings is to have more guns in schools. schools and more guns in hospitals and more guns in college campuses. And certainly, again, as a mother and a wife of someone who goes to a college campus every day, that idea is just terrifying.
Great, thank you. Next question to you, Ms. Arnay. Now let's talk about an issue that has come up recently in Pennsylvania's two largest cities, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, namely paid sick leave. Should employers offer paid sick leave for their workers, and is it a good idea to mandate this by law?
So I've been a proud champion of expanding access to paid sick leave for all workers. I'm proud to have worked in the broad-based coalition that just recently passed this legislation through the City Council so that all of the Pittsburgh City employers will provide paid sick leave. I know that Philadelphia has done this as well. One of the reasons that I feel so passionate about it is because certainly I just can't imagine, can you, being a parent who has to think about whether they should leave their young child home sick alone or whether they'll lose their job. For a lot of minimum wage workers and shift workers, that's what it comes down to. Legislators don't have to worry about it. They have paid sick leave. So I think that it's only right to ensure that no parent has to decide between losing their job, leaving their sick child home alone. It's also a public health issue. I waitressed a lot to get myself through college, and I can tell you that a lot of restaurant employees are forced to go to work sick. Think about what that means to us as those who go to those restaurants. Paid sick leave is a common sense solution that's good for families, it's good for employees, and it's good for business.
Mr. Reschenthaler?
Yes, this is a piece of feel-good legislation. Although it seems like it's good when we look at it, we have to realize just the damage it can do to small businesses. In our economy right now, it's small businesses that are the most vulnerable. And if we keep having legislation and regulation that makes it tougher on small business owners to conduct their business and to make a go at it in the free market, then we're going to have businesses closing up. So I think as a general rule, we need less government in business. We need to make sure that we have free market principles at work and we stay away from feel-good legislation.
Great, thank you. The next question goes to you, Ms. Arnay. One of the concerns of many people right now is support for veterans returning after having served overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan. Can you tell us of your commitment to veterans and any ideas you have to better support them?
Oh, certainly. And I think, like many Americans, I've been proud to see, Joe Biden's wife and Michelle Obama take leadership on this issue right away for the last 8 years coming out of the White House. We owe so much of an unpayable debt, frankly, to our veterans and to their families. Across the street from us lives a family the mom works in our public schools and their father works in the armed services. And we've watched as their twin boys and their young daughter and their mom have had to live through over a year of tour of duty without that dad home. So I think that supporting veterans, their families, their benefits are so important. This isn't just about supporting wars, it's about taking care of the folks when they come home from fighting those wars. And again, I have heard guys speak about cutting veterans benefits, cutting veterans pensions. He's talked about how we need those dollars for bullets and ships and weapons, and it's not an important investment to take care of veterans when they come home. And I strongly disagree with that.
Mr. Reschenthaler?
Thanks. So I'm a veteran. I deployed to Iraq. For deployment, I went back to Iraq to defend a Navy SEAL. And I have a lot of friends who are also veterans. We need to do better with our veterans when they return home. One thing that we have going on right now is a failure to handle the mental health issues that many of our veterans have with PTS. I think what we need to do is we need to work to make sure we, one, recognize PTS, but two, have systems in place to treat the PTS. And I know some of you are thinking, why is he saying PTS and not PTSD? It's because it's not a disorder. Post-traumatic stress is absolutely normal, so it's correct to say PTS. But as far as me wanting to cut veterans benefits, that's absolutely incorrect. I stand behind our veterans. I'm a veteran myself, and I'll do anything with fellow veterans to stand with them and support them.
Next question again to you, Ms. Arnay. What are your views on the natural gas industry in Pennsylvania? First, do you think the technique of hydraulic fracturing or fracking is a danger to the environment? And secondly, should there be a severance tax on natural gas extraction?
So I think that Pennsylvania has been so gifted by having all of these natural resources, right? Home to coal, home to natural gas. We've seen what these jobs can do. and creating a middle class. So in our district, we have a lot of activity happening around the natural gas. And one thing that I wish had happened when the drillers first arrived was we should have done a local hiring requirement. You know, at the time, Governor Corbett said that we should not tax any of the oil and gas drillers because that would be a disincentive. We needed them to come, we needed them to bring jobs. I think that's great. We should have done a local hiring requirement because unfortunately what happens is that they've brought a lot of people in from Texas. And sure, that's created another kind of job, jobs at hotels, jobs at restaurants, but it certainly hasn't created family sustaining jobs like we had been promised. So yes, one, I'm still in support of a local hiring requirement. I wish the shale was resulting in more local jobs. And I do agree that just like I pay property taxes and earned income tax, and so do you, that the natural gas drillers should pay a tax on the natural resources they're taking out of our ground, because our municipalities are experiencing road repairs that are due to the new activity, and our children deserve that extra funding in their public schools.
Mr. Reschenthaler?
Yes. Well, the oil and gas industry is a great win for our region. It creates jobs and family-sustaining jobs that pay very highly. What we have to do, though, is we have to make sure, one, we have the regulations in place to protect the environment. But two, we have to make sure that we don't tax the industry into oblivion. So a severance tax would add a some suggestions are 5.99% tax. However, we have the impact fee on the oil and gas industry. The impact fee is a 5.99% to 8.99% severance tax equivalent. And remember, they already pay a corporate income tax, their workers pay a personal income tax, and the sales tax. If you look at a state like Texas that has no corporate income tax, no personal income tax, and then look at what we have suggesting a severance tax and an impact fee, then we just wouldn't have an incentive for companies to drill here in Pennsylvania. But for me, it's all about creating jobs and good paying jobs. We can do that if we don't tax the industry into oblivion, and they can hire local workers, and they can create other business that supports the oil and gas industry.
Next question to you, Mr. Reschenthaler. A big part of the budget crisis is pensions for public workers, which have been underfunded in recent years. Payments on pensions are growing very rapidly every year. The students want to know what the way forward is to deal with this problem. Should new state workers be moved from a defined benefit plan to a defined contribution plan to save money in the future?
Yes. Well, let me be clear. I support going to a defined contribution program that's similar to a 401k style system. However, I don't want to change any pension that's already vested, nor the pension of anybody who's already paid into the pension system. So the people that are in the system now are already taking money from the pension system now. Leave that alone. They've earned that. We had a contract with them through the Commonwealth and the work, and that shouldn't be disturbed. But if you look at it, we have a $53 billion unfunded pension liability right now. We have to do something about it. What we do is we have to take a long-term approach and stop looking at just the next election cycle. So my suggestion is that we look at it prospectively. So when people in my generation that are just coming into government, when they come in, they go to a 401k, defined contribution system. That way when my generation retires in 30, 40 years, the problem is self-correcting, we don't have this issue. To get us through that period, we absolutely have to make sure we fund the pensions, because no one wants anybody to lose a pension.
Ms. Arnay?
Well, so certainly we do have a problem, and one thing that's important to start out in saying is that all of those public employees were doing their job. Not only were they serving our public as public servants, but they were paying into those pensions year after year after year. So my opponent is correct that we have a moral obligation to fulfill our pension requirements. But what I don't understand is actually how we would do that if new employees stop paying into the pension fund, a pension fund that is already underfunded. The math just doesn't add up. But another reason why I'm not in support of completely moving to a 401k model is that all of us saw just in the last decade that the stock market is volatile, and I don't want to play Russian roulette with anybody's retirement security. I think if we're going to do anything, we need a combination, have combined benefit and combined contribution. Think about our public school teachers, our firefighters, our police officers. These are people who could be making much more money in the private sector, but they've chosen to serve our community. And certainly we owe them to ensure that they're not going to be homeless when they're older. And if we think this is going to save us tax dollars, I think it's really important to think about if we move to a 401k system and those seniors didn't save enough, then when they are seniors, we will be paying for their food, for their health care, to help them with homes. So I think that this is a short-term mindset, and it's bad for families and bad for seniors.
Next question to you, Mr. Rushenthaler. The next question asks about jobs and wages. First, you support raising the minimum wage in Pennsylvania. Nationally and in Pennsylvania, 2.6% of all workers earn a minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. What would be the impact on the economy if the minimum wage was raised? Young people aged 16 to 24 disproportionately earn minimum wage. Also, the unemployment rate of young people nationally is double the average. Unemployed young people earn lower wages for many years because of the experience they've missed. What are your ideas on how the problem of unemployment can be addressed?
Yes. Well, if we're talking about the minimum wage, we have to be reasonable, and we have to look at studies to see what kind of impact a raise in the minimum wage would have on the economy. But as a baseline rule, I would be against raising the minimum wage at this period of time. If we raise the minimum wage, it's going to discourage small businesses from making new hires. Just last week, I was talking to a small business owner. He just opened his second shop. He's doing very well. In fact, he's a Russian immigrant who's really flourishing here in the United States. If he told me that if we raise the minimum wage, he wouldn't be able to have opened up the second shop, let alone open a third shop. And it's because small businesses take the brunt of an increase in minimum wage. The minimum wage jobs are minimum wage because they're entry-level jobs. Eventually, those workers move up and make more money as they should. But if we raise that barrier and raise that amount, we discourage business from hiring. And then the unemployment rate would just continue to increase. As you pointed out, it's bad now for younger folks. It would be even worse if we raise the minimum wage.
Ms. Arnay?
Yes, I guess this is another clear difference between us. I've been a proud champion helping to increase the minimum wage. As many of your viewers and your students know, the minimum wage in this country has not kept up with the cost of living and with inflation. Unfortunately, it's true, while students make up a big percentage of minimum wage workers, part of why this was an issue for us at the Women and Girls Foundation is that 75% of minimum wage workers are women. And the reason that's relevant is that 75% of households living in poverty in the greater Pittsburgh region are single mother households with children. So one of the best ways to help those families lift themselves out of poverty would be to increase the minimum wage. And in the states where they have done it, there has been absolutely no negative at all. Jobs have not been cut. Small businesses have not reported that they've had to decrease employees. You can look at the math, you can look at the data. It's very, very clear. So I think that we need to be honest and talk about our businesses do need to thrive, but so do our families. And increasing the minimum wage is one of the best investments we can make because minimum wage workers put all of their funds right back into our economy. It goes to food, it goes for clothing for their children, it goes into their rent. It doesn't go into stocks and bonds and yachts.
Next question again to you, Mr. Rushenthaler. Now the students want to ask you about your stance on raising taxes. Governor Wolf has proposed raising the personal income tax from 3.07% to 3.57%. 3 weeks ago, this failed in the House of Representatives 127 to 73. If you were in the Senate, would you have voted for Wolf's income tax plan or against it? Why or why not?
Well, first off, it's very likely that one of us on the stage will be voting for the budget in the very near future. So we can't go to the negotiating table by taking things off the negotiating table. We got to come with all options together. We have to be reasonable. We have to understand that we're going to have a negotiation. With that said, as a general baseline rule, I would oppose the Wolf budget, particularly the increase in the income tax and the sales tax. Governor Wolf's sales tax increase would not only increase the amount of the sales tax, but we'd have cradle to grave taxation. He wants to tax everything from diapers to daycare, professional services, marriage counseling, college textbooks and meal plans, which would affect your students, and nursing home care, caskets, and funerals. I oppose that clearly. One, it would hurt the most vulnerable in our society, and two, that sales tax by nature and by definition is regressive. So why would we want to increase a regressive tax? So I'd absolutely fight for that. But at the same time, I'd also want to make sure that we're increasing funding to public schools, which both Republicans and Democrats want to do.
Ms. Arnay?
So in general, I'm actually opposed to any kind of flat increase on sales or earned income tax because those always seem to impact middle class workers the most and low income folks the most. So I've never been a fan of that kind of recommendation. And in fact, we've seen this year that in the GOP's Senate Bill 76, which is their property tax reform tax legislation, it's exactly what my opponent just described. They are balancing taking what they want to do is zero out corporate property tax. So places like Walmart and Home Depot and Target wouldn't be paying any property taxes to our schools. And the way they balance that is on the shoulders of the middle class. The GOP was recommending to increase in sales tax from 6 to 7%. They were recommending huge increases in earned income tax. I'm glad to hear this morning and yesterday that the leadership and the governor met leadership on both sides, and none of them are talking about those kinds of taxes. But just to be clear, because I think it's so important that voters and constituents are informed with the facts, that it was actually both in the GOP legislation and the governor's legislation, these kinds of sales and earned income tax increases and all the services that my opponent just mentioned, they were also all included in the GOP's recommendation. I myself am against that. I've worked very hard to make sure that things like diapers and child care are more affordable, not taxed. And as a women's rights advocate, let me tell you, I worked with a whole bunch of teenagers who are working to make sure feminine hygiene products weren't taxed. We work hard to be champions of middle school children and middle class families. And I just think it's ridiculous that anyone would think that I would be for taxing any of those things.
Very good. Now on to our last question in this round, which goes to you first, Ms. Arnay. Finally, the students want to know about your stances on campaigning. Are you dedicated to running a fair, positive campaign based on emphasizing your own merits and experience versus tearing down your opponent? In particular, things like Social Security, Medicare, and the Affordable Care Act are matters that the Pennsylvania State Senate has no power over. So why even bring up these issues? Why not stick to topics that are relevant to the job you are running for?
So as far as I know, the only things that tonight that I've said that are perhaps bringing up very strong differences between my opponent and myself, like things around cutting veterans' benefits, all of those things are his voice on his own radio show, and any of your viewers can go online and listen to it themselves. And that's all we've done, is ask people to go and listen to Guy speaking unfiltered about his own feelings on these critical issues. The reason that we did bring up his positions on Medicare and Social Security is, even though those are federal issues, every day as state senators, we will be asked to vote on things like Medicaid and pensions and retirement security. Those are the same things that he calls the biggest entitlement machines that he regrets he can't cut at the federal level. So I think it's absolutely relevant to voters to know what his values are when it comes to taking care of our seniors and making sure that health care is affordable to all families.
Mr. Reschenthaler?
Yeah, I'm disappointed in the negative tone that the campaign has taken on my opponent's side. But let me say that my philosophy on campaigning is to work hard and get out your message. I've been doing both. As far as working hard, I've been knocking on doors, over 3,000 already, going to community events, talking to citizens all over the 37th district, from going in and talking in senior citizens centers to, like I said, talking to people at community events. And we've been really focusing on my values, and those values are resonating with the voters of the 37th. Now, as far as the stance on ads, we ran 2, 3, 4 solid weeks of very positive campaign time, because I think that you should have a positive message. We're still running positive ads right now. And again, I feel like I can run positive ads because my values reflect those values of the 37th.
Great. Well, thank you to our candidates, and please stay tuned for after these messages.
Nicaragua is a completely different world. We were there to bring nursing care to some desperate people.
At Robert Morris University, every student is expected to reach out to others.
The very first person that I met was David. Kept saying, "You have to come to my house and watch me play my trumpet." You could tell from the look on his face that it was just his most prized possession. I get back home. A few weeks later, I got a message that a gang had broken into his house at night and they stole it, which was his life. So next trip back, we gave him a new one. The look on his face was just complete disbelief. He just absolutely couldn't believe it. And to be able to do something like that is one of the best moments of my life. He said he'd never forget us.
Change someone's life. It changes yours forever. Robert Morris University.
These boys are my heroes. They come every week to spend time with my children.
At Robert Morris University, every student is expected to reach out to others.
They can teach them something no one else can.
Wisconsin.
They're role models to the children, and homework comes way before sports. Their grades have improved, and their lives are just a bit richer.
Okay.
What they do for my kids is truly wonderful.
Change someone's life. It changes yours forever. Robert Morris University.
I call them my lifeline.
So we're back with Heather Arnay and Guy Reschenthaler, the two candidates for State Senate District 37 here on the campus of Robert Morris University. In the second round, the students will be asking 4 questions and the candidates have a minute to respond. After each candidate has given their answer, they will have each 30 seconds to respond to each other. The first question goes to you, Mr. Reschenthaler. Ms. Arnay claims, paraphrasing here, that no guns equals more safety, based on your answer in the first round. Mr. Reschenthaler thinks that more guns will help. So the students would like you to delve into this issue a little bit more deeply. Mr. Reschenthaler, can you go into more detail into your position and why you disagree with your opponent?
Sure. Well, in the first round, I said simply that we have 3 segments of society that intersect with gun legislation. The first segment is those who follow the law. The next are those who have severe mental illness who pose a danger to themselves and others. And the third are the criminals. What I think is we need to focus on the last 2 segments, because the law-abiding folks are always going to follow the law by definition. What we need to make sure we have more mental health in this country to make sure those that have mental illness are getting treated, and that those that have a situation where they pose a danger to themselves and others don't have firearms. That's just common sense. And as far as those who are criminals, we of course have to make sure they don't have firearms, and we do it by making sure we get guns off the black market, because most crimes that are committed with a firearm, that firearm is more often than not from the black market.
Ms. Arnay.
Yeah, so in the first round, maybe I do need to clarify that I didn't say no guns. What I said was we need common sense regulations to make sure that we are all safe. Just like we have seat belts in our cars, just like we have speed limits on our roads, just like we have stoplights on our corners. That's not no cars, that's safe cars. So I have very dear friends who are hunters and sharpshooters. You know, I live in Mount Lebanon and I have friends whose sons are in the rifle club. I'm not trying to take anyone's guns away, but I do think, like so many Americans, that we want to have background checks, that we want to make sure that folks who are having mental health issues don't have immediate access to weapons, that we don't have loopholes like trade shows or online where people don't have access to background checks. So that means they have more immediate access to guns, and some of those folks might not be the kinds of folks we want to have guns. So again, it's not that no guns, it's gun safety. And I think that I'm in the majority with most Americans in thinking that we must be able to achieve that without threatening anyone's Second Amendment rights.
Mr. Reschenthaler.
Yes.
Remember, 30 seconds here for the rebuttals.
With 30 seconds left, I have to fall back to mental health reform. My political mentor is Congressman Tim Murphy, and he works at length to make sure that we have reforms of the mental health care system in this country. Now, what we have to do is we have to make sure that those who are mentally ill have beds. We have to make sure that they get treatment. We have to look at the criminal justice system. So I was a district judge. I was also a prosecutor in the Navy and a defense attorney in the Navy. And I can tell you that we really need to pay attention to what those with mental illness, what kind of care and treatment they're getting, and make sure we get them the treatment that they deserve.
Ms. Arnay, the next question to you.
Don't I get my 30-second rebuttal?
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't even know the rules.
That's okay. No worries. So I would just say that, while I agree that we need more investment in the mental health care system, what I've witnessed from the GOP, both at the state and the federal level, is they're the first to cut those social services. I too admire Congressman Murphy. I think his bill is fantastic, and unfortunately for him, his party has made it impossible for him to make it into law. So I agree. I think we need more investment in mental health services. I wish that the members of the GOP would join forces with the rest of America in making that happen.
Now to the next question, Ms. Arnay. We want to come back to the issue of pensions. Was it a mistake to increase pension benefits back in 2001? And if so, should current pensions be decreased? Can we and should we balance the budget without changing the structure of state pensions? Governor Wolf has said that the problem with pensions is, quote, not a crisis that requires drastic change, end quote. Do you agree with that? And will we be forced at some point down the road to tackle this problem?
So again, as I mentioned earlier, I think sometimes we're presented with false choices. And I don't think that our choices are funding our children's education or making sure that others have stable retirements. I think that there are so many other revenue options that we have. We talked about liquor privatization earlier. There have been suggestions by the Senate Democrats to engage in modernization, and that modernization plan would actually bring in $80 million that could go towards paying down that retirement pension fund's debt. So I think that things like modernization of the liquor stores, I think things like taxing the shale, which every other state which has natural gas does. We're the only state that doesn't tax them. That doesn't seem fair to us, doesn't seem fair to our kids. That's another way to make sure that we have resources. So again, one of the things that I think is important to note about that increase is I think you are talking about contracts that have been engaged in by unions through collective bargaining. And my family, we were on food stamps before my parents found their ways to union jobs. Those jobs provided us economic security. And I think we need to respect unions and their right to collective bargaining.
Mr. Reschenthaler?
Sure. Well, the question was regarding pensions. So let me be clear that we should absolutely honor the pension obligations that are currently outstanding. It would be unconstitutional, it would be unfair and immoral to take away someone's pension. So I don't think anybody's advocating for that. Now, what do we do to make sure we get past this issue? Because we have a $53 billion unfunded pension liability. The answer for me is to look decades ahead, take a very long-term plan. And that would require new hires, people in my generation, to go to a 401k style system with a defined contribution. Now, of course, that's going to create problems because they won't be paying into the pension system now. However, you can solve that by having pension obligation bonds and funding the $53 billion for the pension. And as our economy recovers and we bring in more revenue from that, we'll be able to cover the $53 billion through those means rather than just keeping on the current system that's not working. We can actually change it, make sure that it's solved for my generation when we retire.
A response, Ms. Arnay?
I'd encourage viewers to just look into the math. I think we talked about Social Security earlier and why that's relevant when we think about pensions and our work at the state level. And the reason is because in many ways, when federal officials and candidates and elected officials have talked about privatizing our Social Security system and changing to a 401k system, the reason that they have not been able to do it is because what would happen if you have people stop paying into that system? The system will explode. The system will be bankrupt. You're not going to be able to fulfill those obligations. And so, this is the reality. We need to make sure that we have the funds in order to fulfill our obligations.
Response, Mr. Reschenthaler?
Yes. I want to touch on the level of fairness with the current system. If we were to go to a 401k style system for new hires, prospective changes, then that would afford the people in my generation coming into these jobs to make lateral transfers. So as a district judge, I'll give you a great example. I had a department that had two phenomenal, a chief and a deputy chief. They were very young guys. So those that worked under them couldn't come up through the ranks because they would have to sacrifice their pension. If we were to go to a 401k style system, people my generation would be able to make lateral transfers. It would be good for schools, police departments, etc. So on a level of fairness and on just the economic reality, we have to go to a 401k style system for new hires.
Great. The next question goes to you, Mr. Reschenthaler. According to the Tax Foundation, Pennsylvania has the 10th highest tax burden in the nation. Governor Wolf has proposed raising the personal income tax 16.3% and using a portion of this revenue for property tax relief for senior citizens and disabled homeowners. Property tax relief is very popular with Pennsylvanians, and particularly older Pennsylvanians. But doesn't this help older people at the expense of younger workers who are trying to get started in life?
So there's a lot going on in that question, but as a general rule, I think that we're taxed too much as Pennsylvanians. I think that what we have to do is we have to stop raising taxes. What we have is we don't have a revenue problem in this state. We have a spending problem. We continually spend more than we bring in. We just expect the middle class to just foot the bill. So if we're talking about property tax relief with senior citizens, absolutely we need to make sure that property taxes, once a senior citizen reaches 65, that the property taxes don't increase year after year. I've gone, like I said, to 3,000 doors, and a lot of our seniors are worried that they can't afford to keep up with the increases. So it's just fundamentally unfair to tell a senior who's lived in a house for 20, 30 years that they can't keep up with the increases that, sorry, you're going to have to move. So we absolutely have to do something to freeze property taxes for senior citizens as long as they're living in that house as a primary residence.
Ms. Arnay?
So again, in the current situation in Harrisburg, both Governor Wolf, the Senate Democrats, and the Senate GOP all have different property tax bills being considered. The earned income tax and tax increases that you referred to earlier aren't even on the table anymore. So I think it's ridiculous to talk about them at all. But when we look at SB 76, which is the GOP property tax bill, which is still in consideration, we're all in favor of making sure that seniors don't get thrown out of their homes because of property tax. They need property tax relief. The Senate Democrat bill and the governor's bills both gave seniors property tax relief. The people they didn't give were not people at all. It was corporations. So they were saying, yes, seniors need property tax relief. Middle class folks, needs property tax relief. They were even giving rebates to renters because, like your students, not everybody can afford property. But they weren't giving property tax to large corporations, and that's the big difference.
A response, Mr. Reschenthaler?
Sure. We all need tax relief. And one of the things that I want to work hard for when I'm in Harrisburg is to make sure that we don't increase the sales tax. As I said before, what the governor wants to do is expand the base of the sales tax and increase it. We'd have cradle-to-grave taxation. As I said, we'd have taxes on diapers, daycare, professional services, college textbooks, meal plans, and worse, later in life, a sales tax on caskets, funerals. We're taxed enough. We need to fight the increase in the sales tax. As I stated before, it's a regressive tax by nature, so it hurts people who need the money the most.
A response, Ms. Arnay?
Well, I guess I'm just curious, since my opponent, 95% of your campaign financing is coming from Republican Senate leadership. So I guess I'm curious as to how you're in opposition to this important bill that they're trying to champion, Senate Bill 76, which you just described. So that is a bill which taxes and increases sales tax on all the things you just mentioned. So are you against Senate Bill 76, and will you be voting against it if you were to get to be in the state Senate?
We were talking about property relief in general, not about 76 in specific. So if we're going to go into 76, I'm going to need a lot more time to respond. But I think that the question was regarding tax relief and property tax relief. Well, and I feel like I adequately answered it for the
I
viewers.
certainly appreciate the candor.
Thanks.
Ms. Arnay, the next question to you.
Sure.
Returning to the issue of the budget, this is something that is impacting students, schools, and social service providers throughout the Commonwealth. School districts, for instance, have to pay millions of dollars in interest on the money they are being forced to borrow. Would you vote for a stopgap funding bill to provide short-term funding in the absence of a state budget? What are your preferred solutions to this standoff? That is, what would an acceptable compromise look like for you?
Well, I'd start there. So I think an acceptable compromise would be one that starts with our shared values. Back in 2013, there was a budget impasse like we're experiencing right now, but it happened at the federal level. And the way that it came about to solution was by women in the Senate reaching across the aisle and coming up with a bipartisan solution and bringing each other back to the table. It's one of the things we do as women, is we're much more likely to reach across the aisle and just focus on solutions, not on ego, not on what we disagree. We start the conversation with, what do we agree on? Where are our shared values? It's something that makes me very proud, and I was so proud to see the women in the U.S. Senate do that. And I look forward to encouraging women in our state Senate to take leadership like that. The reason they could do that is because every month the women of the U.S. Senate have dinner together. Once a month. The only rule is you can't talk about public policy. What that's done is they've been able to get to know each other as humans. And I think that's so important. So that's one of the things that I would be bringing to the table, is this isn't about partisanship. We need to talk about Pennsylvanians and what's best for the Commonwealth.
A response, Mr. Reschenthaler?
Yes. So the question was about budgets and the impasse and also short-term funding issues.
Right.
For starters, what we need to do is we need to make sure that we are reaching across the aisle. We need to make sure that we're working together to pass a budget, because people just want government to work and function. Now, Governor Wolf could have used the line item veto. As I'm sure your students know, he can have a veto on line items. He could have vetoed just what there's disagreement with and then let the other budget items go, so we wouldn't have funding shortfalls with critical services that people need, such as schools and programs for those in need. Now, what I would do is I would bring a judicial style approach to the state Senate, as I did as a district judge, where I had to mediate between litigants, pro se litigants, et cetera, and that I did in Iraq, working with third-party nationals to prosecute terrorists. You have to work together to make government function and to accomplish what needs to get done.
A response, Ms. Arnay?
Yeah, I guess I would just say that I think when it comes to the budget impasse and stopgap measures, I think what's most important is, first of all, I'm not going there to defend Governor Wolf. He's a big boy. He can defend himself, and maybe he should have considered line item vetoes. But I think what's most important is that we're able to make sure that that government's functioning and that schools have funding. And I think one of the things that a lot of Pennsylvanians think might have helped bring this budget impasse to a close would be if the legislators themselves weren't getting paid, while everybody else wasn't either.
A response, Mr. Reschenthaler?
Sure. My opponent tries to distance from Governor Wolf, yet she accepted $40,000 from him 2 days ago. So let's just get that out there. Now, as far as what we're going to do about the budget, both parties have to give and take. We have to use common sense principles. We need government to function. Both sides have to come to the table willing to give and take. I believe that we can accomplish that. I think that Governor Wolf should have used a line item veto to make sure that critical services are getting funded. In the meantime, let the parties work on what they disagree with and come to a solution.
Well, thanks again to our candidates, and we will be back with closing statements after this.
People don't realize how quickly you can end up on the street. One thing happens in your life, medical bills you can't pay, lose your job, and that's it.
At Robert Morris University, every student is expected to reach out to others.
We went to DC to work with the homeless. They sell a newspaper called Street Sense. Thought I'd help.
But if you want to give more, you can.
This person came up to me and said, get a job. And for 2 hours, I felt what it was like to be homeless.
Good morning. $1 help.
Some of the other students said, how can we change this? And I said, sometimes you can't change the world, but you may be able to change one person's world. My dream, open a psych clinic for people on the street.
Change someone's life. It changes yours forever. Robert Morris University.
Each candidate now will have 3 minutes for their closing remarks, and we begin with Ms. Arnay.
Thank you, and thank you for this lovely evening. As voters have heard, there's a big decision and a very clear decision to make on November 3rd. There are big differences between my opponent and myself. Too many people in our community are working hard, playing fair, and falling behind. As your state senator, I promise that I will always put the needs of children, families, and seniors and hard-working Pennsylvanians first. That's because, like you, I grew up middle class. But when I was very young, my parents divorced. And there was a time when my mother found herself alone with 2 young children, and she had to register us for food stamps. But then she and my dad were able to help find themselves union jobs, and those jobs provided our family with necessary economic security. Just the other day, my mom and I were talking about how critical it was to her as a single mother to have access to health benefits and paid sick leave. And that's why I've dedicated my career to protecting our social safety net and increasing and strengthening our middle class. I've worked with legislators on both sides of the aisle and helped pass legislation at the city, county, and state level. All of those to increase benefits for workers, to ensure that seniors have more access to affordable health care, to put in preventative measures to decrease domestic violence, and to ensure that all of our children's schools are adequately funded. These are not just stories about what I will do. This is my track record. It's been my work for these last dozen years, and it's the kind of work that I look forward to continuing as a state legislator. You know, for many of us, things like education and taxes aren't abstract. They're all too real. You know, I'm a parent of a young son in the public schools, so education's very real to me. I've been a homeowner for 12 years, so property tax is very real for me. And as you've heard, I personally have witnessed the power that union jobs have in helping to create a middle class. And that's why I find a tax on workers so wrong and so personal. That is very real for me. Now, we all like, and it's great to think of young people like my opponent who's recently moved back to the district, and these young folks who really just come back and want to get involved in civic life, and that's great. My concern is that my opponent's positions seem to be more rooted in what he's heard on conservative talk radio than what he's experienced and grounded in real life. As we've discussed, our funding is very different. You're right. I have some support from the governor. It is an extreme minority compared to the resources that have been invested in me. The majority of my funds, the majority of the funds that have come into my campaign have been donated by people who live in the community, by carpenters and painters and teachers and nurses, and the list goes on and on. And I encourage any voter to look at our finance reports because I do think that they articulate our values. And I'm not sure how my opponent will reform Harrisburg when Harrisburg insiders have provided 95% of his campaign funding. So again, I look to you and I say, when I go to Harrisburg, I believe in fair representation, but I also think that corporate interests have enough representation in Harrisburg. I'm not going there to represent them. I'm going there to represent you and the hardworking families in Senate District 37, and I ask for your vote.
Mr. Reschenthal, your closing remarks.
Yes, Dr. DePlato. I have to do something. It's my mom's birthday.
Oh.
She's in the audience. Happy birthday, Mom. Thanks for being here tonight. All right, with that said, Dr. DePlato, thanks so much for moderating tonight, and I want to thank all the students that have worked here. It has to be really exciting. Thanks to the staff and the faculty here at RMU. You've given us just such a phenomenal platform to come in here and talk about the issues of this campaign. And Heather, thanks for coming here today. I wish you all the best. You're welcome. I'm from Pittsburgh. I was born here. I was raised here. I went to public schools here. When I was in the Navy and I was done in the Navy, they would have sent me anywhere in the United States I wanted to go. I could have gone anywhere. But I made a decision to come home, come back to the South Hills of Pittsburgh, where I was born and raised, and start my civilian life here. And I did that because I believe in the values of Pittsburghers and of those in the 37. We're people that, we know the difference between values and whims. We know the difference between tradition and a passing fad. And we're also people that respect business because we know that it's the private sector that's the true source of our prosperity, not the government. We also are smart enough to know that we'd rather see a new job created than just a new tax dictated. And we're also a group that still honors an honest day's hard work because hard work is bred into the bone in places like southwestern Pennsylvania, and it certainly was for me. Now, that's why I'm running. I want to take those values to Harrisburg because let's face it, Harrisburg right now is broken. We have too much bureaucracy, we have too much gridlock, we have too many politicians just running around telling us why they can't get anything done instead of working together and actually getting something accomplished. Now, even though Harrisburg is broken, we can fix it. We can do it with hard work. We can do it by understanding that we have to limit, we have to have straight talk, and we have to reach across the aisle and make sure that we're getting something done and say there's some issues that are too big to worry about party labels. Now, when I go to Harrisburg, I want to be the guy in the room that says no when other people are talking about raising taxes. I want to be the one that says good enough isn't going to cut it when we're spending other people's money. Now, my time in the Navy and my time on the bench as a district judge taught me something important, and that's that good ideas are worthless unless there's somebody to do something about those good ideas. Right now, Pennsylvania needs good ideas, and I'm the one that's going to put those good ideas into action. I'm going to take our values to the state Senate. So thanks again for having me tonight. I appreciate it.
Great, and thank you very much to both Guy Reschenthaler and Heather Arnay, and to the Robert Morris University students in the Political Science Club and RMU TV who produced tonight's event. Good night, everyone, and please don't forget to vote.
Thanks.
Okay.